everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory. Today is another Wednesday. I am going to do a soft spoken true crime case. For those of you who prefer whisper, don't worry, Friday and every Monday are pure whisper cases. I was trying to make my puppy settle down and sleep. She was going through every single seat and chairs, even beds, but nothing was perfect. So I had to restart this video after I finally found her a spot that she approves and think is comfortable. So I'm here telling you the story, and she is just across the room where I am trying to rest. So hopefully she'll stay quiet this time. Now, today's case was a cold case that eventually was solved, and it covers a very upsetting story that will transport us to October 1989. It was a Sunday evening around 9 p.m. And a few kids were out. So, again, these kids were out kind of late, I would say, for an October night. Were two 11-year-old kids and a 10-year-old kid. They were in what was considered a safe neighborhood, and Jacob Wetterling had permission to be out. Jacob and his younger brother, Trevor, were home alone that night while their parents went to this dinner party. Now, the parents were not home, but they had a friend, Aaron Larson, who was going to stay over. But soon enough, after the parents left, they became bored. We're gonna have some snoring in the background, apparently. Anyways, I have a 21-year-old son that likes to complain when he's bored as well, so I guess it happens. So at that point, they were kind of bored. Jacob called his mom and said that they wanted to go to their local Tom Thumb, which was a store to rent videos. VHS, I'm assuming, at the time. For those of you who were not around, I was young in 89, but even in the 90s, remember video stores being very popular. I remember just going in them and browsing through the different sections, funny movies, scary movies, the new stuff. Maybe you remember Blockbuster here. But they just wanted to rent something and help them be entertained. But Patty Wetterling said no. She didn't want them to ride their bikes in the dark. So the boys were disappointed, and instead of just leave it at that, they called their dad, Jerry Wetterling. He listened to his son. The idea was that Jacob and Trevor would tape flashlights to their handlebars. Jacob even said that he would wear his reflective vest. And besides, the store was just 4 blocks away. They'd go straight there and come straight home. Their friend Aaron would be with them, and they would be together at all times. Now, October, it's getting dark pretty early. So by then, it was pitch dark. They were in the small town of St. Joseph, Minnesota, and really what they considered a safe place. Jerry, the dad, kind of chuckled and agreed that they were thinking about everything. Kind of enjoyed listening to the kids pitch. So he agreed. Jacob was very, I don't know how to say it, but he was a kid of his word. They went this time and they did not stay long at the store. They checked out their video and started to head back home. But about halfway home, a man suddenly stepped from the darkness and blocked their path. He was wearing all black in a stocking mask. And he was threatening the boys with a gun. He told the boys to push their bikes into a ditch and to lie face down on the ground. He asked their ages, and when Trevor said that he was 10, the man ordered him to his feet and told him to run into the woods. He said, quote, "Don't look back, or I will blow your head off." And Trevor knew to listen and not look back. But he ordered Jacob and Aaron to stand. Look at Aaron and asked him to run. The same that he said to Trevor. So Aaron did as he was told. He went straight to this tree line. There he found Trevor in the dark. The last time they saw Jacob, he was being dragged away by the man in the mask. As they were hiding, they heard this car start up. That's when Trevor decided to run to get home. A few minutes later, Trevor was on the phone telling his dad what had happened. They launched this big search that night. Every officer in the St. Joseph Police Department looked for this boy for several days. This was a kidnapping, so the FBI was eventually notified, and they sent agents to assist. They still could not locate Jacob. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Jacob seemed to have vanished into thin air. The safe place where they lived back in the 80s. It's haunting the people from this town. But I think we all know that predators will travel and wander even in the most secure places. So this was no exception. This was not an isolated thing. Between the summer of 1986 and the spring of 1987, at least 5 teenage boys were attacked and sexually molested in nearby Painesville. And even more recently to that date, in January of 1989, a 12-year-old named Jared Sherrill was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and physically threatened by a male. That crime had happened in Cold Spring, Minnesota, which was only 12 miles away from St. Joseph. That particular perpetrator threatened to, quote, blow the victim's head off, just like this with the boys, or this one with the boys. Trevor Wetterling and Aaron Larson relived that over and over. Now, Jared, this kid that I just mentioned, that was pretty close to the time that this happened to the kids. He gave a description that matched the one that Trevor and Aaron had provided. This guy was white. He was around 5'8". He was between 40 and 50 years old. He had a broad shoulder and he had a low, raspy voice. They had several suspects, really. Danny James, Heinrich, who had already been investigated multiple times for this kind of thing with children. And Heinrich was questioned but released when witnesses failed to identify him from a photo. I don't know, when they show you the pictures, you just have to pick somebody. Line up, but in pictures, I guess. So, the case went cold. But in June of 2010, federal agents swooped down on a farm near the Wetterlings abduction site. And they had a search warrant for the owner. They had an anonymous tip that suggested that Jacob Wetterling was buried on the property. So forensic experts spent days really going through the dirt to try to find something. Just so you have an idea, truckloads of earth were driven away from the site for testing at a lab. We're talking about dirt here. I mean, at that point, the FBI announced that they had a person of interest, and they brought that person in for questioning. He was later on released and never charged, so the case had stalled again. Now, later on, there was a blogger by the name Joy Baker who was 22 years old when Jacob Wetterling was taken. So she remembered the news, the missing posters, and overall, the pleas of Jacob's parents for their son to be returned unharmed. But she was curious and kind of disappointed that everything remained cold, I should say. So she started her own investigation. She visited the video store, the abduction site. She followed the route the boys had taken. She recruited somebody else to help her. And this guy was Jared, the guy who was abducted and molested at 12 years old, possibly by the same man. So they began tracking down other victims in the area, young victims. So they came to the conclusion that Jacob Wetterling had likely been taken and likely killed by a serial rapist with taste for boys. In fact, we're convinced of this so much that she passed her findings to the county's sheriff's office, hoping that they would reopen the case. They were skeptical of her conclusion. Some of the cases that were highlighted were never reported. And even if the accusations were true, the MO in these attacks were different, because the boys had been released after the assault. They all came back home, but Jacob did not. She was so disappointed and discouraged that both of them kept up the pressure with the sheriff's office and through the media. Soon enough, it was in the media again, and it was a segment on John Walsh's CNN TV show, The Hunt, that eventually tipped the balance. After that segment aired, the FBI announced that it was reopening the investigation. In the year 2015, DNA evidence from Jared's assault was retested. This was again in 1989, the boy that was let go. And when they tested, it matched this P-word guy. And at one point, suspect Danny James Heinrich. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations had run out of this particular crime, so he couldn't be charged even if he admitted doing that. But it was very similar to what happened to the Wetterling boy. So they had probable cause for a search warrant. They found nothing really. But it would land him in serious trouble when they checked his computer and they found a lot of inappropriate children stuff. So the stuff that they found was going to land him in jail for a really long time. Police was able to uncover links to other crimes, including Jacob's Wetterling. He was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. So he was open to hear a plea deal. The deal was that he would plead guilty to the stuff child related in his computer, and he would get 20 years. All other charges would be dropped. The condition was that he would have to say or had to tell what he knew about Jacob Wetterling's disappearance and release the location of his body. So he agreed. Jerry and Patty Wetterling got their closure, even this kind of horrible closure. According to this guy, he dragged Jacob away from the abduction site to his car, bundled the boy inside, and handcuffed him. He then drove him to this gravel pit where he did inappropriate things to him. And I'm sure you get the idea. Then he strangled him and buried his body. He said that a year later he returned to the site and found the body partially uncovered. So he moved it to a different location. He also said that the gun he used to intimidate every victim had never been loaded. On September 1st, 2016, he led them to a pasture near Painesville, 30 miles from the abduction site, where they found Jacob's remains. Still the clothing he was wearing that last night. He was identified by dental records. And I bet his parents' hearts were just broken, really. He would not be tried for his murder because of the deal he had. 20 years at a federal prison in Massachusetts. With good behavior, he might expect to be out in 17, but he should have paid a little bit more attention to the conditions of the plea agreement, really. Because the state of Minnesota is still entitled to bring civil charges against him after his federal term ends. So he'll still be behind bars. As a sick person that he was. So given the danger that he is to society, authorities will exercise that option. And as Judge John Dunham said at his sentencing, quote, "This crime is so heinous, so brutal and awful that it is unlikely society will ever let you go free." Now, I heard about this case as a cold case. I don't remember if it was on a ASMR channel. I remember listening to the story of the kids going to the video store and not knowing who did it. It could have been a cold case episode from a long time ago, and this was recently solved. But it is very interesting to me that part of the spark, I keep looking at this, and part of the drive started with a blogger who could not let this go. And I'm happy she didn't. I'm happy she found the help. And really happy that this had closure. Now, I will never understand this kind of cases, and I don't like to cover them. I really don't. It breaks my heart every time I learn about these cases, and I start thinking what they must have felt and thought. Those last moments when somebody was an adult and who typically you expect to protect children does this. It just breaks my heart to think about that. But these things sadly happens all the time, and it doesn't have to be an abduction, but sometimes, we know cases of people that suffered during, I'm going to call it this treatment, and to the hands of somebody they know. You guys know I try not to judge people. It's not in my blood. It's not in me to judge people, but I do believe that everything we do in this life, we will pay the consequences. And to be honest with you, I do think there's a special place in hell for this kind of behavior and this kind of abuse, this kind of sickness, and just to even think about that somebody can have this kind of content in their stuff, it's sickening. It's sickening, and I wonder what it is wrong with people that do that stuff, that watch stuff like that, that are interested in stuff like that. It's just, my mind can't really comprehend. But then to act on it like this guy did and get away with it for so long after so many kids, I mean, that's another kind of sick. I hope this was not a downer. At least he was caught. At least people cared, even years after this happened. And I hope that Jacob, wherever he is in a better place. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did you know about this case? Did you know that it was solved? Thank you so much for being here today, guys. I'll talk to you guys on